Today's episode is sponsored by Trading 212, the platform bringing commission-free investing to everyone. The Chancellor promised not to raise taxes on working people, but if you're a saver, investor or landlord, you just found out you aren't part of the deal. Buried in the budget's boring fine print is a sweeping overhaul of ISAs, new stealth taxes, and a cascade of rule changes designed to squeeze anyone living off their assets.
I want to know what's really changing and what you can actually do to protect your money. And in today's dumb question of the week, is now the time to emigrate? All right, let's get into it. So today, Romin, we're here to give our hot take on the budget a mere 1 week after it was delivered. But I think that's fine because the Treasury has been drip feeding out details in the days after the budget, which kind of clarify a few things in ways that are quite impactful for investors. Now, let's start with ISAs, everyone's favorite tax wrapper, because what made the headlines was that the cash ISA allowance is going to be reduced to £12,000 per year from 2027, and only for people under the age of 65, which is a bit strange. But there is more detail, isn't there, behind that that's coming out now?
Yeah, so let's go to the logic of the reasons behind it. They say that this is going to stimulate growth because people will put more money into equity, a tiny sliver of that will go into UK equity, and supposedly that'll reduce the cost of funding for UK companies, their cost of capital, and that's going to stimulate growth. And I think that's a fairly tortuous chain of logic. I'm not convinced this is going to move the needle, but that's the justification for it, I think.
The other justification that the Chancellor said at the dispatch box, rightly, is that for long-term investment, obviously you want to be in stocks and shares, and she quoted some example about a typical stocks and shares investor having made much more money since ISAs were introduced. And we're going to agree with that, aren't we, Romin? But there's a question of should people be forced or firmly nudged into stocks if they're not that comfortable with it?
Yeah, I mean, she got that right. She fluffed the line. She really screwed it up when she was reading out that bit of the speech, which I was surprised by. I'd have thought she'd been all over that, but no.
The ABR threw her off course, didn't it? It's really ruffled her face.
Yeah, she started off really flustered, but then once she started slagging off the opposition, she started to get into her stride. But this is taking something beautiful, which is the ISA, and really screwing it over, making it more complex, putting in these conditional clauses into what you can and can't hold based on your age. And I just think that messes up what was really a nice product and really sets the UK apart compared to other countries in the world. So this complexity about over 65s, I think that was because people like Martin Lewis were saying that people over that age want to de-risk. So for their risk profile, it might make sense to be able to put more into cash.
But remember, this is for new money being added. Over 65s are surely more likely to be drawing on their pots rather than adding £20,000 in new money each year.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really poorly thought through set of rules. And having this minimum risk floor, if you like, which is effectively what you've got, has all sorts of unintended consequences, I think. For example, maybe you put your cash allocation into your SIP, but of course your SIP is your long-term money, and there you'd want to have greater returns. So you'd probably want to have more risky assets in your SIP.
Well, hold on, let's just step back a bit, because I think in advance of this budget, obviously it had been leaked that the cash ISA allowance was going to be reduced, but most people, including us probably at some point, said, well, for the informed investor, it's not a big deal. If you want to de-risk in your stocks and shares ISA, well, just hold some cash in there or buy a money market fund or anything cash-like that's low volatility and safe. Who really cares if the sort of cash ISA itself is being squeezed? But after the budget, the Treasury published a document which said that, hang on, we're aware of this little wheeze, and we will be consulting on a test to determine whether an investment is cash-like, and if it is, maybe it won't be allowed to be held in a stocks and shares ISA. And for any cash balance you hold in your stocks and shares ISA, we want to tax the interest that generates.
Now that is absolutely crazy. I mean, it's like saying to artists, you're not allowed to paint with blue paint. Any paintings you can do, that's fine, but blue is out.
Yeah, but Romin, we're both colourblind, and I think we can still paint.
But not just that. I mean, if you've got a shade of green which has got too much blue in it, that's going to be ruled out as well. Or telling bakers they can't use yeast, or telling musicians they can't play the note C. I mean, it's bonkers. If you're an asset allocator, you've got to have control over what you put into the portfolio to control risk. And cash is an unbelievably powerful part of that allocation. It allows you essentially to have zero duration risk, and it always hedges against stock falls and bond falls because you're not taking any duration.
But I guess they're not saying you can't have cash. They're just saying, well, if you want to de-risk, that's taxable. But I don't like the fact that that's sort of puncturing the whole point of an ISA, which is that you don't pay tax on money inside it.
It just complicates a product where it was really nice product that other countries don't have. And I don't see why you'd have this complication. And I just hope that in future this gets rolled back, or that there's sanity that prevails. Because at the moment, all I think they're planning to do is to talk to the industry about whether this should be done or not.
I also think it's counter to the goal that they've stated, which is to get more people into investing, because complexity baffles people and puts them off. But also the fact that people might want to dip their toe in the water, but knowing that you can't de-risk easily or without cost is surely going to put people off wanting to take on risk in the first place. And this is compounded by the fact they've said there will be no transfers allowed from stocks and shares ISAs back to cash ISAs.
No, I don't have an issue with that. I always thought the cash ISA product was a pointless one because it restricts you to just one asset class, just the colour blue, which makes no sense at all. But I disagree with the actual premise of this idea, which is that if you put more money into equity, it's going to be better for growth in the UK. Because remember that what usually happens, if it is a bank that's issuing the ISA, then they'll use that cash and they'll lend it out to the real economy. If it's an asset manager, clearly that's not the case. But even then, indirectly, they'll end up buying UK government bonds, which pushes down the cost of borrowing for the UK government. So this all kind of feeds into growth indirectly.
There's also a multiplier on that money, isn't there? I know building societies have been sort of screaming from the rooftops that, hang on, don't take the cash ISAs away, because we rely on that to fund mortgages and to fund many more mortgages than you'd expect for £1 in a cash ISA.
So all sorts of unintended consequences here, and a really poorly thought through policy.
Don't often see you this angry, Roman.
Yeah, but I'm going to be sharpening my pitchfork and lighting up my torch and heading off to number 11.
Just banging on the doors. We want asset allocation! But what should people do about this? I mean, the rules as they're written are not going to come into place until 2027. You've got a couple of years, and who knows how it will actually shake out through the consultation.
Well, you've always got alternatives. For example, are they going to ban gilts, which are about to mature? Because that'll be almost impossible to enforce, because it means that if the gilt is a 10-year gilt and it runs for 7 years, will its volatility fall below some threshold as it pulls to par? And then you'll be forced to sell it? How are they going to legislate against that?
This is interesting. So you're basically saying, how are they going to determine what is cash-like?
Yeah, I mean, if it's volatility, then gilts, when they have this pull-to-par effect, are going to fall under the threshold. Or maybe they'll ban gilts from the ISAs, which is going to increase their cost of funding, which would be bonkers.
Yeah, I think whatever rule they put in place is going to have tons of loopholes, isn't it? I imagine the finance industry can concoct infinite different ways of generating something which delivers the risk-free rate and a safe asset, despite the fact that it looks like it's invested in something else. Like you could have a fund that goes long and short the same stock, which will deliver approximately the risk-free rate, less fees. There's loads of stuff, right?
Yeah, in America they call that a box, and you can do that with derivatives. So you can go long and short the same thing, and it generates the risk-free rate. So, yeah, there are products in the US that already do this in order to optimize tax on cash income.
And what about mixed asset funds, where it's like, I don't know, 80% short-term bonds, 20% equity? But where's the line in the sand here?
Yeah, I mean, is Life Strategy 20 going to be banned because its volatility isn't high enough? I mean, that's it's just a can of worms. I just can't see how this could be realistically implemented. But if I was going to have something cash-like, I'd go for those indirect exposures, maybe via gilts I mustn't say these things on the podcast because it sounds like they listen to this stuff.
I mean, as angry as you are now, Romin, imagine how angry you would be if they started charging capital gains tax on gilts again.
Oh, I would be angry if they did that. That would be crazy. And it, really would be crazy because often it's the domestic bondholders who are the ones that stick with you through thick and thin. That's true in Italy, for example, where Italian government bonds are widely held by members of the public. And it's a very sticky, loyal investor base, which pushes down the cost of funding if there's demand for their stuff, for their yield. So I think they should be doing the opposite, which is to make gilts even easier to buy and educating people about the benefits of owning them. In fact, you could say this whole thing about our huge desire for cash-like products, that's more about education than it is about having a stick with tax. But of course, they wanted revenue, so I suspect that's why they went down this route.
I mean, I have seen some people saying that maybe the secondary motivation for these changes around the cash ISA is that for people who want to stay in cash and are over the limit, more of that will fall into sort of taxable savings and generating revenue for the government. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's one of the primary reasons why they went down this route. Because if you did educate the public better about investing, well, that would cost money. Unless maybe they'd offer some kind of incentive for people like me, to talk about this kind of thing. The government certainly has started engaging with so-called finfluencers and, maybe they'll try and educate people better about investing. That could be a better route to go down than these crazy policies.
I mean, I guess it's only crazy compared to recent history. Like, I believe there were certain restrictions like this in the early days of ISAs and stocks and shares ISAs, and there was a separate limit for cash ISAs and stocks and shares, and you weren't allowed things like money market funds inside a stocks and shares ISA. So we're sort of winding back the clock at the cost of complexity.
Yeah, well, hopefully this is going to get rolled back, or hopefully it won't even make it into the statute books.
Okay, so we've talked about ISAs a lot, and maybe the last thing to say here is that the annual allowance, the subscription limit for an ISA, is going to be frozen into, well, I guess indefinite future. I think they've announced it for the next 5 years or something. And the thing to remember is it's been frozen at £20,000 since 2017. So it's a generous product. When you compare it internationally, it's one of the best things out there, but it's getting slightly less generous every year.
Well, a lot less generous. If you look at cumulative inflation over that period of time, 8 years of inflation really whittles down the value of some kind of fixed cash limit. But look, despite all of these horrible changes, I still think the ISA is an incredibly useful product if you do want to invest tax efficiently. But maybe we should start to consider some of the things which aren't tax-free, where the taxes have been changed quite significantly. And probably, again, this is going to have unintended consequences.
I think you're right. So if you're receiving money from savings, from dividends, or from property, then the government announced the tax rates are rising on all of those different things by 2%. So from 2017, basic rate taxpayers will be paying 22% rather than 20% on savings, dividends, and property income, 42% for higher rate taxpayers, and 47% for additional rate taxpayers.
Now, you can kind of see why Labour would do this. They're the party of workers. So if you're living off asset income, you're going to be in their crosshairs. But this is the kind of thing which I think could get rolled back quite easily by a future government. So this just sets them up for opposition parties to say, look, if we get into power, we're going to roll this back. And that'll be quite an attractive proposition for some investors.
I think we should look at the dividend taxes in a little bit more detail. Because what was interesting on that one is that it increased by 2 percentage points for basic rate taxpayers and higher rate taxpayers, but not for additional rate taxpayers. That's staying at 39.35%. Now, the thing to remember about dividends is that they're paid after corporation tax. So when you add the two things together, these changes more or less bring it into line with standard income tax, maybe a little bit less still. But a lot of people forget that because salaries are paid before corporation tax. So it's not easy to compare apples to apples here. What the government appears to be trying to do is to equalise the tax base across different types of income.
So, for example, if you set up your own company and get paid via dividends in that company, I guess that would have been beneficial. Now it's not so beneficial.
Yeah, and there's been big changes to dividend taxes over the years. Obviously, the allowance that you can earn in dividends tax-free has shrunk hugely over the years. It was £5,000 not that long ago. Now it's £500. And the tax rate's been going up at the same time. But I think there's a distinction here, isn't there, between someone who's investing in a fund, which is paying them dividends, a 2 percentage points increase on that. Yeah, it's annoying, but it's not a huge deal. Whereas if you're a small business owner trying to structure your income and you're receiving most of your income through dividends, it's probably more salient to you.
And look, if you're a buy-to-let landlord, this could be fairly significant. You may not be on huge margins anyway, particularly if you own property in the south. And that means that one of the unintended consequences, I think, is this is just going to be another disincentive to have buy-to-let.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how the buy-to-let numbers really added up for most landlords anyway. And you've seen it, haven't you? Loads of landlords have been selling up. And this just makes that even more the case, I would say.
And there are legislative reasons why you might want to get out of that market anyway. But for the renters, I think that's going to be a problem, because if there's a chronic undersupply of rental property, then there's going to be huge competition for those rental properties. And usually these are the people who can't afford to get onto the housing ladder. And this increases that hurdle rate, because if you're paying more in rent, then it's going to take even longer to save up that deposit. So I think indirectly this is going to decrease equality when it comes to things like the ability to buy houses. And this is one of the unintended consequences, I think, of this policy.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure on that. There's so many different things that play into the housing market. Obviously, Labour's overhauling renters' rights at the moment in a separate bill. The property market is pretty stagnant anyway. So we'll see, right? A lot of it depends on what happens to interest rates and all sorts of things. So it's hard to pin it on any one change. But can I just go back to the dividends thing for small businesses? Because I saw some good numbers from M&G where they looked at what impact these changes would have for a small business owner. So they say at today's tax rates, a business owner with £100,000 of profit who wanted to extract all of this from their company would end up with £66,543 after tax. From April 2026, the same scenario would result in a bank balance of £65,209. So that's a reduction of just over £1,300, which is significant. However, it's still much more tax efficient than taking the whole amount as salary when they'd only end up with £61,370.
So £4,000 difference. That's not huge, and it's certainly less than it was.
Yeah.
But you can see what they're trying to do, which is to make it less attractive to become self-employed and set up a company where you're the sole employee, just to pay less tax.
Yeah, less attractive relative to being employed, right? They want people to pay the same level of tax for doing similar things. Now, you can get into an argument about whether running a small business is the same as being an employee. Obviously, you're taking more risk, unless you're a disguised employee. And the legislation should have ruled that out anyway. But it only had to be there because of the whole idea that you pay less if you're self-employed. But this is one where the unintended consequences are hard to think through.
So what we've talked about so far is for people who are retired, living off income, which is generated by their investments, savings income, or maybe people who are self-employed. However, it has affected people who are employed, and there are some fairly significant changes there too.
All right, let's come on to that after the break.
Today's episode is sponsored by Trading 212, the platform bringing commission-free investing to everyone. Trading 212 Stocks and Shares ISA is the cheapest way to invest, with zero commission and one of the lowest FX fees I could find on the market. Looking to keep things simple, you can easily automate your investing with pies that allow you to rebalance your portfolio at the click of a button. Customers with Invest accounts can also benefit from the Trading 212 card, which has no FX fees, true interbank rates, and offers 1.5% cashback on all transactions up to £15 per month. Many Happy Returns listeners can claim free fractional shares worth up to £100. Just create and verify a Trading 212 Invest or Stocks ISA account, make a minimum deposit of £1, and use the promo code RAMIN, RAMIN, within 10 days of signing up, or use the link in the show notes. When investing, your capital is at risk and you may get back less than invested. Past performance doesn't guarantee future results. Pies and Autoinvest is an execution-only service, not investment advice or portfolio management. Automatic investing refers to executing scheduled deposits. You are responsible for all investment and rebalancing decisions. Free shares can be fractional. 212 cards are issued by Paynetics, which provide all payment services. Trading 212 provides customer support and user interface. Terms and fees apply.
Okay, let's talk about pensions, because there were some changes here, and I don't think many people understand them. People don't understand pensions really at all, do they anyway? You've built a whole business on that premise. But what we're talking about here is a cap on salary sacrifice pension contributions and how tax efficient they are.
Now, previously, it was really tax efficient to sacrifice some of your salary and that way increase the contributions to your pension. Because effectively what that does is reduce your gross income, and that reduces the amount of tax you had to pay on it. And the other component, of course, was national insurance. You didn't have to pay national insurance on those contributions.
If they were done by salary sacrifice. Other kind of pension arrangements, like net pay arrangements and relief at source, you would be paying national insurance. So yeah, like you say, salary sacrifice was incredibly valuable.
Particularly if you're a higher rate or an additional rate taxpayer.
Yeah.
But again, I think the goal here is to generate more revenue for HMRC. And from April 2029, the decision is that only the first £2,000 of pension contributions via salary sacrifice are going to be exempt from NI, national insurance.
And this is employer and employee national insurance. That's a lot when you add it up together.
So there's a disincentive for the employer to do this and for the employee.
Yeah, the key thing is how will employers respond? They're going to pass on the cost to employees, or a lot of it. I think the OBR assumed like 2/3 of the cost gets passed on to employees through lower pension contributions or through lower wages or whatever. Or employers might just stop allowing salary sacrifice pension contributions in excess of the cap. Maybe they'll move to other arrangements.
But if we look at the consequences here, I think less pension saving is going to be a problem. This is not what the government should be promoting. Okay, you could say that the people who did this kind of thing were people on the higher salaries anyway, which is true.
Oh, yes, definitely true. The £2,000 cap will not affect like the median earner.
But even for the higher earners, I think this will be growth negative in future, because if you're paying more tax, contributing less to the pension, then your total wealth will be lower in the future. And that means less spending on things, stuff, services, goods in the future. So this makes us poorer. I can't see the benefit of that. But it does make the government a bit richer in the shorter term.
I mean, I guess the government looked at it and said, this scheme is too generous. Like, we want to incentivize pension savings. And remember, money in your pension and investments grows free of tax until you withdraw it. But Rachel Reeves cited things like investment bankers just shoveling their whole bonus via salary sacrifice into their pensions. I don't know why that's a problem. They're going to pay tax on it when they withdraw it, but she wasn't happy about it, I guess.
Yeah, again, I think this was ideological as well, and part of Labour's ethos. However, it's not going to be popular at the ballot box. And again, this is one which can be rolled back really easily, and it's going to be a really good vote winner.
Because what we need, Roman, is pensions rules changing every year, isn't it? That's what we need when it comes to long-term saving investment.
Yeah, it just makes planning that much more difficult, as we whipsaw from one policy to the next. And you can bet the next government, whoever they are going to have this on their manifesto, and we're just going to flip back.
Yeah, maybe. We have to see. I think when it comes to pensions, it could have been a lot worse. At least if you were paying attention to the rumours in the run-up to the budget. There was talk about reducing the tax-free lump sum. There was talk about pushing people into UK investments. There was all sorts of different rumours flying around. And yeah, what we've got is a tweak to the salary sacrifice rules, which means that if you assume the standard 5% employee contribution to a pension, this only really affects people earning more than £40,000. Now, that's a lot of people, but Labour's doing their thing where they want to protect or be perceived to be protecting people on sort of middle and lower incomes.
So extending this ethos of hitting people who are the wealthiest most, there has been a big change with venture capital trusts. Now, if you're not familiar with it, this was a really useful tax break. If you've used up your ISA allowance, your SIP allowance, and you filled your boots with premium bonds, if you're into that kind of thing, then venture capital trusts were an interesting way to get tax breaks with additional contributions. Now, here you're buying early stage companies. Venture capital is risky, but you did get a huge tax break on your income tax. Now, you could have put up to £200,000 per tax year into new VCT shares, and then you could claim income tax relief at 30% of the amount subscribed.
Up front.
And that's up front, yeah. So if you put £50,000 in, that would give you up to £15,000 off your income tax bill.
I sense there's a but coming.
Indeed. So that's been knocked down from 30% down to 20%. And that's for investments made on or after 6th of April 2026.
So this is the kind of thing that didn't really make the headlines, but is pretty impactful for the relatively few people that use these schemes. But I'm guessing, again, there's going to be consequences economically.
Yeah, imagine you're an early stage company and you depend on VCTs for your capital. Well, that's going to be drying up. There's not going to be as much capital available because there's not such a big tax break. Now, if their policy is to increase growth in the UK, where does that growth come from? Well, a lot of it comes from small companies. And reducing the funding for those companies by reducing the generosity of the tax break is not going to be positive for growth. At least that's what I'd expect.
There was an interesting thing in the budget as well, where for the VCT scheme and the enterprise investment scheme, they basically raised the limit on the size of company people can invest in, like with a much higher cap. I wonder if this is because they feel that we're pretty good at seed investing in the UK and getting companies up and running, but then we struggle to scale them. Maybe they're trying to push more money into that sort of company that's succeeding, but needs an extra push to really compete internationally.
Yeah, I hope that's the case, because I think that would be a positive. And I think that increase in the threshold is a positive choice.
But the thing to be aware of is that these changes come in from April next year. So I guess if you're looking at VCTs, you've got a hard deadline where you get more tax relief if you move quickly. There's not much time left. But remember, they're risky, so run into it with your eyes open.
Oh yeah, this is not something which you do for capital that you're worried about losing. There is a fairly high chance of loss. But of course, that tax benefit usually overrode it. Now that tax benefit is smaller than it was. So I think, again, people aren't going to be stampeding to use VCTs.
But let's get into the real weeds of the budget now. There were some changes, which are relatively significant, which are around the ordering of income and how different allowances can be used, and making that more restrictive.
Now, for tax planning, this was a really nice way to optimize things. So in the UK, you've got your tax-free personal allowance, below which you don't have to pay any tax and above which you do. And that's $12,570 for most people. So let's imagine you've got two sources of income, one of which you pay higher tax on and the second of which you pay lower tax on. Well, clearly you'd want to use up the allowance on the things which have the highest tax rate before the ones with the lower tax rate. And that was something you could do at your discretion. Well, now no longer.
And the ability to shuffle the order. I think tax planners called it beneficial ordering, which comes into play in certain situations. Maybe if they've got the starting rate for savings or the dividend nil rate. These things we don't talk about much, but there are occasions where you don't want to go with that standard order. That seems like it's going to no longer be possible. Right, the last thing I want to talk about, Romin, is what's called the high value council tax surcharge, which is going to come into place in England and will mean that there's an additional tax to pay if you own a property, residential property, worth more than £2 million. And this will take effect in 2028 and is subject to a consultation.
Now, this got a big jeer from the opposition party because obviously it's going to be unpopular. But what was interesting at the dispatch box was the retort that Rachel Reeves came up with. She criticised the opposition for being more worried about this mansion tax than they were about the benefits of lifting children out of poverty. So there are estimates that about 450,000 children will move out of child poverty as a result of scrapping the two-child limit on benefits. So I think this one's more of a populist change, unless you're one of the people who has a house worth 2 million or more. Now, how many people is that going to affect? Well, I suspect several of the people listening to this podcast, but it's roughly 100,000 higher value homes which will be affected. That's well under 1% of properties overall. And of course, if you look at the geographic concentration, it's where the wealth is. It's London and the southeast.
I mean, fine. This is a genuine political disagreement. If you want to bring in a tax on high value property, the UK would be in no way alone in doing that. What is kind of problematic, though, is the hard cliff edge, which is going to have all sorts of distorting effects. If you're a surveyor, there's a big incentive now to value homes at 1.99 million, right? And presumably you'd list your home at 1.99 million than 2 million. But I don't know if they're just going to use sold prices. These homes don't sell that often. You're going to have this whole sort of valuation process and presumably an appeals process. And I just don't know how open it is to abuse. Let's say your property is valued at 2 million. What do? Just smash a few windows and save on your tax bill because it's now worth less? I'd have thought there would have been a smoother way to bring this in. I've seen a lot of comments from tax experts even if this is what you want to do, this is not the way to do it. But hey, we'll see how it shakes out, right?
For me, what was interesting was how they implemented it in terms of the thresholds and the amounts you pay. So it's like a kind of ladder. So if you go above 2 million to 2.5 million, it's 2,500 a year. Then you get 3,500 a year up to 3.5, 5,000 per year up to 5 million. But then above 5 million, it's just capped at 7,500 a year. So if you live in one of these houses in Mayfair, you'd just be shrugging. You don't care, right? It's not going to bother you. But I guess at that point, you get diminishing returns for HMRC because not many houses fall into that category.
I guess what they're trying to rectify is the fact that council tax looks regressive, right? The people in the massive houses in the southeast and London pay a far smaller percentage of the value of their property each year in council tax than in most of the rest of the country. But as we know, the council tax system is based on 1991 values and has not been looked at in decades, and it's just ripe for reform. But when you reform it and try and bring it into line with where house prices are today and where they've moved in different parts of the country, crudely speaking, there'll be half the country that are winners and half the country that are losers, and the losers will shout more than the winners will cheer if you do that.
But look, we talked about things which were in the budget, which we think are maybe not such a great idea. But another way of looking at this are things in the budget which we would have liked, but which weren't mentioned. The one obvious one is simplification. Every time we get a new budget, we're just adding more whistles and bells, and we end up with this really complicated system. And this budget was no exception, because no politician wants to have that simplification process thrust on them, because it doesn't really benefit anyone in an obvious way. So it's not a vote winner, but I think overall it would benefit everyone. So I was disappointed that this wasn't a radical budget. It was just something which had to please so many different people, the bond market, Labour backbenchers, and of course the electorate, although that didn't seem to figure very highly on the scale.
You know, the thing I was disappointed wasn't in there was kind of what you're saying, actually. They haven't squashed the bugs in the tax system. There's this really obvious, terrible design when people earn £100,000, the marginal tax rate goes up to 62%, or over 70% if they're repaying a student loan, which is crazy. And people are reducing their hours or sacrificing way too much into a pension at the time when they need the money. They could have found a way to fix that, even if they do it in a revenue neutral way by dropping the additional rate band a little bit. And there's the whole other problem where child benefit payments get tapered down and withdrawn, which creates a similar problem. And you can end up with marginal tax rates that are way above 100%. And you literally have less money if you get a pay rise. These are the kind of things that no tax system should have in them. There's no excuse for that. And we've gone through many budgets where it's remained the case. This is not a Labour problem. It's been there for a decade. But at some point, they have to fix that. And at some point, they have to scrap the triple lock. On that note, we end it.
I guess for me, what I would have liked to see would be something that would actually stimulate growth. And that would be something like a tax break if you upskill. I know that sounds quite wishy-washy, and I know that there are some incentives in place for that already. But increasing that incentive, because how are you going to increase the amount of money you make per hour? Well, it's by improving your skills. And it's something that we hugely underinvest in the UK relative to other countries. It's not sexy, it's not exciting, but I think it could have been much more stimulative. And that's the real problem with this budget, which I think is it's not going to stimulate growth. Just look at the OBR forecast.
I'm a bit worried if you found that budget sexy, Romin.
I didn't. Now, we had a little rant on our private forum in Pensioncraft about the cash-like investments. So if you wanted to join us and whine about tax policy or even learn more about investing, you can do that at pensioncraft.com/membership.
Okay, today's dumb question of the week. Is now the time to emigrate? Bit of a provocative one, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm getting to the point in life where the thought of emigration is not attractive. Maybe some people like to emigrate abroad, but personally, not for me.
People have looked at this budget, and I've seen discussion online in like the Reddit financial forums, the Henry subreddit, high earner, not rich yet, where they're saying, look at this. They're just layering more and more taxes on high earners. We're not rich. Why are you going after us? We're just trying to become rich. Why don't we go to some country where we can keep more of our money?
Well, coming back to my reasons for not going abroad, for me, there's a lot about British culture which I love. Of course, I've been raised here and I love the things which I'm familiar with. But there's a lot going for Britain. And I think I'd be quite reluctant to move away because of all the other stuff.
It's also not all about money, is it? It's not all about tax rates. They change all the time. Growth stories change all the time. And like every country has its problems. I do think that Britain has pretty ingrained specific economic problems. And if I was young, maybe I'd be looking to go abroad for a few years. But sadly, Romin, I'm disastrously middle-aged right now. But I saw that on the Pensioncraft community, someone had shared a comment that was posted under a Financial Times article about the budget and about this question of emigration. And it really made me laugh. Did you see this, Romin?
I didn't see it, no.
Let's go through it very quickly. So the comment was titled, PAYE Pig, Relocation Guide, Vote with Your Feet Time. Option 1, Dubai, 0% tax, infinite sun, no winters of discontent, build sandcastles with your tax savings. Downsides, it's hot and your mates will call you a sellout until they visit. Portugal, NHR scheme is dead, but still cheaper than the UK. Pastide de nata is greater than paying HMRC. Learn to say now to extortion. And they just run through all these different countries.
Oh, I like Switzerland. Low tax, high salary, mountains, chocolate. Costs £8 for a coffee. Worth it to watch UK collapse from a distance. I thought that was great.
Poland, Czech Republic or Romania, 19% flat tax. Your £100,000 goes stupidly far and you learn to drink properly. Now, it's all a good laugh, but I think that's a good point. Like, what's really damaging is speculating that there's going to be an exit tax, having people flee for sunnier climes, and then not bringing in an exit tax. All these rumours and endless speculation before each budget is really not helpful.
The only way to have any continuity would be to have some kind of cross-party agreement on policy. But that's just looking really unlikely at the moment, given that we're in such a state of flux.
And isn't really what democracy is about, is it? Thank you for joining us for many happy returns. Keep sending us your questions, no matter how dumb, at mhr@pensioncraft.com.
And do remember to check out pensioncraft.com for all the information about our membership, courses, and investment coaching options.
Many Happy Returns is a Pensioncraft production, co-hosted and executive produced by Romin Nakiza and Michael Pugh. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes and is not financial advice. We do not provide recommendations or endorse any decision to buy, sell, or hold any security. We cannot be held responsible for any actions listeners may take, and investors are encouraged to seek independent financial advice.